Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's lovely to see so many people logged in for today's event. For those of you who have not met me before, my name's John Moss. I'm your host with the Mostess today, and I'm delighted to have back Amir, the SOS Intelligence CEO and founder, with us today. Hello, Amir.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here and great to have so many of you watching live. It doesn't make me nervous at all, one bit. And hello to anybody watching this from on demand. So yeah, spookily saying hello from the past.
That is a very good point. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, a lot of the webinars that we've had over the past 12 months or so, they are available to watch on demand. If you go to sosintelligence.co.uk, sosintel.co.uk/webinars, you will find them there. So today, I've been looking forward to this one, Amir, insights into our collection process. So we've got, without giving away the trade secrets, we have some interesting information for everybody.
Yeah, now that you've said that, everybody's disconnected because we're not giving away necessarily any trade secrets, but we're giving some insights as the topic of the webinar, as the title of the webinar says, into how we do collection and the intelligence collection life cycle and process, specifically to SOS Intelligence.
Very good. A little bit of housekeeping just before we get started. So if you see on the bottom right-hand side of your screen in the browser, there's a couple of little tabs there. First one is polls. We've got a few polls going as usual. It'd be great if you could answer those. It's always interesting to see the results from them. And also, probably more importantly, you have the questions tab. So please do add people. Please do add the questions, and you can actually upvote and downvote as well, which is really good. And what we will be doing is having some time for questions at the end. However, if there's something particularly pertinent during what we're discussing today, we'll bring that on the screen and we'll endeavour to answer that there and then. If for some reason we miss your question, we do get notification. We've got a record of what questions were asked, and we will get back to you personally. So here we go. So these are the key things that we're going to be talking about, what you are all going to learn today. So an introduction to the intelligence life cycle, directed at the information collection planning, and also automating being human. This is the one that I absolutely love. This is getting round the various defenses. And I'm looking forward to this bit. So yeah, that will be really, really good. First of all, though, we have a slight bombshell in terms of how SOS Intelligence actually works. So, Amir, I'm handing over to you here.
Yeah, so the truth's out. We've got, as you can see from that picture, hundreds and thousands of people spread across a huge building, reading every single tweet, every single forum post on all of the cybercrime forums and analyzing it and then posting it and alerting customers. No, that's obviously not what we're doing. It's supposed to be a bit of a joke in that, it's unrealistic to expect a company to be able to do all that en masse, and certainly something that we wouldn't expect our customers to necessarily be able to do. And for the size of company we are, our priority is to automate as much of pretty much all of our collection is automated, because we just couldn't necessarily keep our head above the water if we had to manually review stuff. There's literally not enough hours in the day to be able to process the vast amounts of data that we consume. So it's all automated, and this is exactly what this talk is about: is what we do and how we go about doing that. And I guess the point is that it all starts with direction and the intelligence life cycle. And what I mean by direction is that we collect using a directed model, and we capture or we've captured our intelligence requirements, our IRs, and we are not a general or undirected collection company, in that most intelligence collection comes from a tasking, a reason, a justification, and ours is to gather as much information from a large span of cybercrime or cyber-related sources where data is pertinent to leaks, data breaches, and other similar topics are discussed, shared, and promoted. And the purpose is to enable the scanning of the content against relevant keywords. Those keywords are generally ones that our clients give us to scan that content against and alert them when a match is found. But we also have our own generic terms that we have built into the system to actually acquire content or match content and store that in the system. And I'll talk about some of that later in the webinar. But there's quite a lot of feedback built into the platform. So we're looking for new things and to increase our collection and to expand our indexes, if you will. So we're always looking for new onion domains that we might learn from a Telegram channel chat where somebody said, hey, this is a new ransomware group, and shares the onion address. The system will tag that as an onion address, and the indexer will work out whether it's seen that before or not, and then work out how to process that and add that to a queue for automatic processing. So just an example of how that works. But in terms of the life cycle, there are a number of kind of key stages, as I talked about. To the planning direction is, why are we doing it? What's the purpose? That drives our collection plan, and that is an assessment of whether is this information that you have to hand? Can you just quickly look it up, or do you have to then go off and actually acquire that information from a source? Then you have the processing part of that, actually looking at the material that you've collected, the analysis, and then the dissemination into some sort of intelligence product. Where we kind of let off or pass on to our customer is the analysis and dissemination part. Although we do some part of analysis through contextual risk analysis using our own LLM, it's just to give you a flavor to an analyst what the topic might be about and what's the discussion in terms of the content of a post or whatever the content is. It's not necessarily drawing the capabilities of a threat actor and how viable that is, whatever the threat is or whatever the subject is. We empower our customers to do that through the use of our platform.
We've got the first question, Amir. It's actually it's going to dovetail nicely into the next slide, and you can explain about the images that we are using in the deck today. So I'm just going to bring this in for everyone to see. So how does AI capability play into what we do? This gentleman said, I think it's a gentleman or a lady, we use AI for real-time on-demand data tracking based on select keyword phrases to capture state bad actors engaged in trafficking. I don't know if you could.
Yeah, I mean, so AI, as I just mentioned, it plays it's kind of a footnote in the analysis component of the life cycle. So it provides what we're calling our contextual risk labeling, and that's derived from the data that we've gathered for the last several years against an NLP that we've essentially not prioritized, optimized to derive the type of labels that make sense to our customers. So there's two main ways. There's the contextual risk labels, as I said, that talk to the associated risks with the content, and then there's a general fast processing of a general risk score for the alert or the message that's being processed. So we then can show to our customer a low, a medium, and a high. But that's the extent of AI for where we're at the moment. But it is something that we're looking to kind of leverage more and more as we get bigger, and from customer feedback. But hopefully that answers the question.
That's very good. Thank you very much. And I dropped a hint about our imagery that we are using, so I'm gonna go on to the next slide, which follows this one, if that's okay, Amir.
Yeah,
so,
of course. Yeah.
And this isn't my spelling, everybody. I'm just going to be. I'm. I wasn't a great speller at secondary school, but I was better than this.
So yeah, I guess on the topic of AI, these slides have been built with the assistance of ChatGPT. I asked it to draw the diagram that I've just shown you, and this is the best outcome that I could pick to put into the presentation. It did its best. It knew some letters, and it's a bit of a alphabet spaghetti of a diagram. So it's kind of tongue in cheek, but also kind of, I guess, if you don't have the rails set when you're bowling, you kind of get some very unexpected results. So when you're using AI in a general sense for this kind of work, you can get some really oddball results. So yeah, whenever we're dealing with AI, or whenever we're dealing with any kind of thing that we're looking to expose to customers, we test it as much as we can to make sure that the results are as predictable as possible.
Very good. So, onto the first main part of this, and this is something that fascinates me. The collection planning. You let people know a bit more about this. I mean, this is key, isn't it?
Yeah. So this is the second main step to the life cycle. So this is the start and end of that loop for us as a focus as a company, is the curation of that source list of pipelines that we're going to be building. And I'll talk about what pipelines are and how they work. But just to define curation, so that the literal definition is the action or process of selecting, organizing, and looking after items for an exhibition. Whereas in our case, it's not an art exhibition. It's a collection, a list of collection sources for automated information processing. But the definition is absolutely accurate. So we're reviewing, selecting, organizing, and looking after these items or these sources, in our case, for continuous information collection. So looking at what the sources are, what they could be. So there could be any number of forums, marketplaces, a news source, a Telegram channel. It's for the most part a website or a web source, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. There are a vast variety of sources a big variety of sources that we collect from, not necessarily all from the dark web or Tor. As I'm sure people in this industry will know, generally most of it is on the clear web. Some places are wholly on Tor, some are on I2P. So the variety of collection is quite wide. But that's kind of what the source is. It's that is what we're looking to collect from, is this news channel or this topical forum or some sort of marketplace that's trading in RDP loggings or something like that. Then we would kind of look at the protection. What kind of protections are in place for a source? So do they use web application firewall? Are they blocking Tor access? Do they have captures or some sort of human verification? And we would look at what are the conditions of access. So, what is it? Just an open source? Do we have to log in? If we do we have to pay for login? Is it a mixed source? So you can see some stuff, but you can't see other stuff. If you do have to pay, how much do you have to pay? What kind of verification, if there is a verification process, and all these things are considered at this curation stage of the collection planning. So it's really important to know these things and understand them. And then we look at the kind of threat assessment part of it as well. So what are the topics that are discussed? What are the posts generally about? For example, if it's a forum, can we determine the general credibility and capability of the members of that forum generally, what they talk about? For example, is it potentially quite a credible forum that has reputation, or is it a brand new forum that's just popped up because one larger forum has been taken down and several have been popping up, and this just somebody who's very noisy on Twitter, and could be a scam, could be some sort of, who knows what kind of operation going on there. So all these things we can kind of consider, and any one of these things could actually discredit it from becoming a pipeline. So we don't necessarily want to burn lots of energy and time and capability on collecting from a forum that's just spun up like today. And it has 3 members, and it looks scammy, and it looks like it might be there to just, scam people out of credits or whatever. But we'll monitor it, and we'll look at it, how it develops. Certainly there's vast amount of forums out there that and markets that say they sell all sorts of stuff, but they're actually just scam markets, and their whole purpose is to scam other criminals out of money. And if we get the feeling that that is the case, then it's very likely that we would just not collect from that source. We would just kind of delist it.
Do you think protection, Amir, and defences by these sources that we've been talking about, is that something you're seeing an increase in?
No, not necessarily. But what we do see is a larger percentage using some sort of denial of service protection or web application firewalls. So, so as we're seeing there, less, just under 13% are using WAF, some sort of WAF, with Cloudflare being the most popular, possibly because it's free, and also controversially because they have a very poor abuse response, and that could be why. But there's other WAFs that other threat actors or other groups have used, so it's kind of varied. But Cloudflare tends to be the most popular. 4% require access. So, generally, people assume that we have to have access to loads of things. Actually, generally, not necessarily the case. And just under 3% actually use some sort of active capture or human verification. So the actual landscape of collection sources is fairly open, fairly unrestrictive, with typically not a lot in the way to get in the way of actually automating collection.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fascinating. Thank you. So moving on to the next part of the sort of the process. So this is building and then automating the collection, and this is a particularly fine image that you generated.
Yeah. So don't read too much into it. A robot, pressing a box. I mean, absolutely nothing by that at all. But yeah, I think having had discussions with people who are in the similar field as what we do, or just on the periphery of it, I suppose there is an assumption that there's a lot of hurdles in place to collect and maintain or have a persistent collection. What we've found is that that's typically not the case. The vast majority of cases to build an automated collection takes us about 5 to 15 minutes, and it's a fairly trivial process. Sometimes we have to get creative with how we navigate a source, and sometimes we have to use more advanced bypass methods like human verification bypasses, which we're going to be talking about later on in the kind of being human part of it. But yeah, just I guess to dispel some of the myths, it's typically not doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take a lot of time to build, and they are pretty much generally fairly easy to maintain the life cycle of. And what kind of the way that we work in terms of our objectives of what we're looking for when we're building a collection is that we're looking for less than 1 second from ingestion, processing to alerting. So pretty quick timelines. We don't really want to be hanging around doing lots of AI querying, lots of modeling, or whatever it might be. We've got to be really quick through the platform. We want to maintain a simple data model. So we don't want to be building individual parsers for individual forums and extracting very heavy things out of it. We want a very basic model that we can reuse, and potentially you could say that to the detriment, because we're not labeling certain things or missing out on certain attributes that you could give to a client. But we think that that's less important, really. A screenshot is probably less important than just the data that's in there. So we also want to work with a modular design of these of our front end and our back end collection system. So it's not like just one box doing everything or one process doing everything. It's got to be generic and it's got to be templatable, because we can't be stuck with just one way of doing something for one source that we can't then repeat to another source. That would be very expensive. And we've got to be quite flexible as well. So we've got to be able to collect from, Telegram one day, and then from this RSS feed another day, and from this, FCA website tomorrow. So the process has to be adaptable and malleable to whatever it is the protocol or website that we're dealing with. And we've got to be able to also collect from vast array of languages, scripts. So we've got to be able to deal with Cyrillic and Chinese and Arabic script and that kind of stuff. And that is it's an important thing to note and state, because that's quite a potentially fundamental part of how you would build that pipeline and make things work in search and things in the future.
Understood. I think the next slide, which sort of sums up what you've just said, in some ways, and other ways, is just spectacularly confusing, isn't it? So what on earth did you tell ChatGPT to produce for this?
Yes, I prompted it to produce a diagram of our collection pipeline process, which is the slide next, but the left image was extremely abstract, and you can kind of see how it was drawing onto the whole kind of spidering thing. The right hand diagram is slightly less confusing and almost kind of touches on what we're doing, but in a completely incorrect and abstract way. And I have no idea what metadata is and annualization in Gape. In Gape we do. I don't know what it is, but it sounds cool. 3so rep as well. It really struggles with words, doesn't it? It's kind of like a fever dream.
It really is.
Yeah, it's interesting how that works, but sometimes it gets really close, which is scary. But yeah, I mean, if we go to the next slide, you'll kind of see what I was trying to actually get it to draw. In the end, I drew it myself.
There you go.
Yeah.
Now we can.
No, it makes perfect sense now, doesn't it?
Exactly. So tell us about this. I mean, this is sort of the nub of everything, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. This is the kind of core of the pipeline. So we kind of start at the left hand side with the source. That is the forum marketplace, a file, whatever, and that's the bit we're considering. How we're going to process and iterate through and consume, whether it's on Tor, I2P, the clear web, a closed or open forum, whether we're having to have to provide credentials to access and that kind of stuff. That's the output of that collection planning process. We've now led to the point where we've gone, yes, this is a viable source, and we should be able to successfully build a collection pipeline for. So that's where we're now starting to do. And part of that planning process would have derived some decisions on how we're going to actually collect from that source in terms of our proxying infrastructure. So one of the things that we've had to build over the years is a fairly robust, varied proxying infrastructure where if the source is on the dark web, Tor, we need to be able to load balance all of these hundreds of thousands of connections to Tor. There are some technical limitations of Tor, which I won't go into the boring details of, but we have to kind of work around those and build out sufficient capacity to be able to collect. If we're pushing like 40 terabytes of information across Tor a week, we need to be able to do that. For example, I2P, we have load balancing for I2P. If it's a HTTP clear web source, do we need to consider geographic diversity? So do we need to appear from that locale where that forum is hosted? If it's, for example, a Turkish forum that only allows access from Turkish IP addresses, do we need to pop out of a data center somewhere in Turkey? Do we need to appear as if we're on an ISP that's a Turkey ISP? So we might need to have an ISP type geographically diverse IP address, and potentially we might even need to leverage residential proxies, which are what they say they are. So basically, it's coming out from somebody's PC, from their home connection or from their mobile connection, and that kind of that utilizes that IP address to access that source. So that kind of encompasses the proxying component, which is kind of one of the more important parts of this whole piece in terms of maintaining persistence, because the least suspicious you can look to your source, the most likely you are to maintain that collection for as long as possible. So if you are as low risk as possible, as far as an IP address, so like if you come from Tor to a website that's clear web and it's not really liking that, it will either block you immediately, or it will apply the highest level of kind of scrutiny against you. So we need to make it think we're its friend from an IP address perspective.
I think one of the ways I've thought about this is that we are just trying to blend in. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, blending in is really important. As we kind of touched on previously, like if it's just a brand new forum and it's got like 3 members, it's probably not seeing a lot of traffic. So if you're hitting it continuously every second for new content, you're going to stand out like a flare to whoever is administrating that forum, and they're going to go, who the hell is this, and block you. So you obviously don't want to be doing that. That would be a silly thing to do. You're going to lose access, and you may not want to actually collect from a source that's that small or quiet. But if you have to, then obviously you have to take considerations to how aggressively or not you collect from them.
Very good.
So yeah, the collection monitor, that's just kind of like the brain of the operation, the heart of it. And obviously each pipeline is individual. So each of these diagrams I've shown is per one of these 300 odd sources. And the collection monitor is that interface to that source. So it's the parser, the processor of that data. And people have asked, do we use Selenium or other frameworks? We don't. We don't think they're necessarily fast enough. There's nothing wrong with them. So there's lots of ways to do this, and lots of different companies do this in varying degrees. Nothing necessarily new or special that we're doing, but what we're doing is quite specific to us and how we go about actually processing the data. So we try to be as granular with the level of access and control that we can have, to a point that it's almost socket level control over the access to a forum or some source. So, for example, we need to be able to sometimes order specifically how cookies are stored or sent across in a HTTP header. So it's that level of granularity that we have to do in code. So the collection monitor is what iterates the content and monitors for new content, and it also is responsible for raising exceptions when there's issues. So, for example, if the source has gone offline, it would raise an exception. If we're getting a 401 or access denied kind of message or whatever, we need to be able to handle that and alert somebody or some process. It also kind of manages the humanity of the access, so making sure that we're not like doing stuff sequentially, that we have some sufficient kind of throttling to fetching content from the source, so it's not always every 4.3 seconds or whatever.
So going back to the blending in.
Yeah, exactly. Blending in with the noise is really important. And to that, it also coordinates with other parts of our platform and microservices that we have, like the Solver microservice, which I'll talk about later. And that's the kind of like human verification bypass type stuff. So in terms of the content matching, that's pretty straightforward. It loads in customer keywords or basically keywords from in our platform into memory, and it's a very fast matching engine that does a very few but very important things, which is basically match and store and also extract certain metadata and prepare that data and content package for pipelining to be sent across to other parts of our platform. So it's really important that that's quick, because you can't be taking, we wouldn't possibly be able to scale efficiently if you grew with 500,000 keywords that it took a second for each keyword or whatever. It's something that we look at very closely on a very hard, like a tin level, to make sure that the processing is as fast and parallelized as possible. And then the other things are done in parallel, not necessarily sequentially. So alerting and indexing. So we decide whether we need to generate a notification based on what the customer wants. And we obviously generate a notification and we log that as an alert, that match. And we also pipeline that document for indexing, for retrospective search and that kind of stuff. There's also some of these enhancements, enrichments that are done again in parallel, which talks to the question that was asked at the start of the webinar. The AI bits are essentially NLP that are derived from the content, and we do these in parallel to not impact the speed of that processing as it goes through the pipeline.
Very good. That's fascinating, and I think this is we've mapped this out over 5-10 minutes, but it's all happening a lot quicker than that.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, our goal is less than a second. I mean, for the most part, it's a lot less than that in terms of processing, but we've got to get from one end to the other and do all of that without like falling over, because it's really important that we don't miss stuff, like a false positive or a false negative, and that the maintenance of that source is also primary, because we'd like, if things were to drop off, they drop off because there's a Europol, joint police action that's taken down that forum, which is the vast majority of reasons why we lose access to a source, rather than, we've been detected because we've been really sloppy, which happens very infrequently, but has happened, and it's a learning process that we go through.
Very good. Thank you. And this next slide is just an example of the source, isn't it? Which is interesting to see.
Yeah, so this is just this is the kind of like end bit of everything that's happened just before that. So we show you the source URL of whatever it is that we've collected. The inline contextual risks are applied to that alert, and they're done in such a way that the labels are in English, independent of the source language as well. So if it's Russian, the NLP has been built against and optimized against a whole bunch of Russian forum text and stuff that we are able to kind of translate that accurately enough. So you basically get the source, the risks, and the actual raw original content of what we pulled in from that source.
Very good, thank you. And something we've talked about on some of the other slides during the event today, but I think this slide sort of sums up the importance of what we're calling feeding and watering, and a particularly fine Gandalf representation from AI.
Yeah, so this is I asked it to draw me what I feel like, where you're just kind of a wizard with many orbs that you're pondering and managing. But yeah, this is the bit where we're getting into the longevity of that pipeline now that it's built. How do we maintain it and persist? And some of the things we've already talked about. So we've talked about not being robotic and sequential, which I think is kind of like a given. Don't like have HTTP track or some obvious user agent as your user agent. We do things like user agent rotation and account rotation, so that we're potentially always a different type of browser, or we're always potentially a different type of user on a forum, and that's just to kind of keep that blending as much as possible in the noise, so that we're not always the same, accessing the same kind of information, that kind of stuff. That's quite important. And I'm talking when I'm talking about this stuff, I'm talking about very much that 2%, 3% of sources. So these extra techniques aren't necessarily always required to be applied, and it's very much a cat and mouse game, as we've kind of alluded to before. But obviously you don't want to necessarily burn all of your capability at the front. You want to kind of try a little bit and see how you get on, and then adapt. But there's lots of tools in our belt that we don't necessarily all use at once, and we use sometimes more than others, depending on what the source is. So there's lots of stuff that we kind of have to do, and previously, for example, bypassing Cloudflare was a lot more straightforward. A couple of years ago, Cloudflare even at one point didn't care about matching user agent to the cookie that it issued. So for example, you could use a valid cookie against another user agent, so there was a lot less complexity in terms of build. But at one point it switched over and they were like, yep, no, we're going to be matching every single cookie we issue to exactly the same user agent. So in the past there were things that you could do a lot using just a JavaScript engine and various other things. And as time has gone on, we've had to adapt and learn to circumvent these protections to keep that persistence and that feeding and watering, and that whole kind of ecosystem has developed and been built around those techniques, so that we can maintain persistence on 260 odd, let's say, live collection at any one point in time.
And this moves nicely onto the next slide. It's about this maintaining collection access, this persistence, and this is where some of the microservices. Another fine image. we've God, it's just bizarre, isn't it? That we've developed.
Yeah, that's right. So this is the bit that it's the very sharp end of that 2-3% of where bypass or human verification bypass is needed. This is just one of the microservices that we have that deal with that type of solution. We have a number of these, and we're just kind of showcasing or just explaining or describing how one of these works, and to kind of cut a long story short, as I kind of said before, that a blended approach is the most is the best approach. So we're not going to necessarily blow all of our capability at the start of a collection. We'll look at making sure that we're connecting to a source from the least risky location, and that we're not being too aggressive, and that all of those kind of techniques that we've learned at the very start of that journey are being applied. But sometimes none of that would work, and sometimes you just have a source that has applied very rigorous control because they might be under persistent denial of service. They might have other hacking groups that don't really like them much. So it's not necessarily that they don't like being scraped necessarily, but they might have upped their protection levels quite high, that you kind of like have to somehow figure out a way to automate these things, because you're going to have a problem, and your collateral damage in some ways, because of what's happening. So one of the things that we built was a microservice that we call Solver, which we've tried to generalize as much as possible for any number of website sources, but typically each solver is specific to the solving characteristics of Cloudflare or whatever WAF it is. And the way that it works essentially is that it's a trained CV, trained computer vision framework that accurately solves the I am a human verification puzzles, and it does it in such a way that is as human as possible. So, like, I don't know, the best way I can describe it is it doesn't immediately click on something, and it doesn't immediately toggle something. It has offsets and randomization and various things built into the way that it does stuff, that ensures that it passes the checks, whatever checks it needs to pass, that it solves them, and it keeps the system happy for years and years. And we've been running some of this stuff in various levels of versions and iterations for like 3 years, and we've had no issues at all. And the system essentially receives a request to solve from any number of our collection pipelines that go, hey, I need, I've lost access, solve this please. And then it does its job, and then it passes back what it needs to pass back to the pipeline, and the pipeline's then able to continue its job of collecting from that source. So these microservices are set up part of the collection process and the ecosystem of the SOS Intelligence service, that enable us to not have to have that picture right at the start of the webinar with all those hundreds of people, and make it possible and realistic for us to collect the way that we do.
It's a good point. Just sorry to interject, Amir. Going back to that very first picture of all of the people in the room, it's we put it there as a joke because that's not what we do, and we do that in all the ways that you've talked about today. But nor do we expect our customers to have that level of resource as well, isn't it? So we're giving them that resource. We're giving them their capability. They're maybe a small team, or maybe, the IT person, not the cybersecurity person even. So we're empowering them, aren't we? It's not only just what we do, it's what we provide the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're 100% right there. And I think the other thing is that you're investing human resource and getting human value where it's most important, and that's the digestion and analysis of the information. And I personally think AI can only go so far in getting that accurately, and every time that the human can kind of look at and look at the context and read between the lines of a post and go, crikey, that's to do with this thing that I saw yesterday, and then stitches those things together. And the only way you can really get that is where you empower and get the people to do the human things that they're really good at, instead of sitting there pressing F5, continuously looking for new posts on a forum or whatever might be required. So that's kind of what we're trying to empower and take away that pain from, and we do the collection, you do the analysis. And I think there's no real shame in saying that and doing that. I think that's it's what we do.
Yeah. And I think this I mean, we're coming to near the close now, but this flows on exactly after this. If you don't know what's happened or it's happening, you can't do anything about it. You're blind to the danger. And that's what we're trying to give people, is that the ability to know when something has been leaked, something important, something vital, something potentially business critical, and people, companies, people within IT or security or cyber security, to then make a decision that they need to change passwords or to perform resets or something like that. So it's very much reducing the potential business risk, which can go into time, hassle, and of course a lot of money as well, sadly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of my kind of closing points is that this is the last webinar of the year. But if you have enjoyed this, we've got loads of webinars that you can catch up to via Livestorm. So we have a page, a webinar page on our website, SOS Intel.co.uk, but also you can navigate it back through Livestorm as well, which you're in at the moment, or will be once you're watching this on demand. So please do. There's some great topics that have been covered by my colleague Daniel and John. So yeah, I really hope that you've enjoyed them. Feedback is always appreciated. So please do keep in touch. Amir at sosintel.co.uk. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Amir. And it's been a real pleasure this year hosting you and Daniel, and the feedback that we've had, and the sort of hundreds of people who've watched all of these webinars all over the world as well. One thing for those of you watching now live, or if you are watching on demand, ideas for webinar topics in 2024, please. We absolutely don't want to be creating content and time and spending time producing these on something that may not be of interest. We can do a little bit of guessing, but we're very keen for you to get in touch and say, hey, I'd love to know a little bit more about this. So that would be really, really useful. So thank you ever so much for your time today. It's lovely to see so many people logged on now. And if you're watching on demand, thank you for watching on demand. One thing we have got as well is we send out a regular newsletter. You can access that via the website and sign up for that. And you can also follow us on Twitter, X nowadays. Nearly.
Yeah, X. It doesn't feel right.
It really doesn't.
No, it doesn't sit well. I'm rejecting reality and substituting it with Twitter.
Yeah, I agree. Boo, Elon. We like Twitter. So thank you so much again, Amir. Lovely to have you on. Having you on the event today.
It's been a pleasure.
And thank you ever so much, everybody.
Thank you so much
and watching today.
Great.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.